our work, that we are the church. Each of us is the church. And that is a powerful thing, that one person can go out and be the church. At the same time, we're a community together, and one link that is missing is a link missing. Everything that I've done has been what I believe the gospel is about, which is sharing with the community, helping people who are forgotten and marginalized, and learning myself.
Sometimes we hear in church, or even in some of the prayers of the prayers of the missal, that Jesus came to this earth to die for our sins. And how do you see that in relation to what you were saying earlier about Jesus having to face the consequences of what he was doing and saying, violating the Sabbath according to the strict rule that you could not do any work on the Sabbath, for instance? But there is that element that we hear in services and in devotions, that Jesus came precisely to die for us, to offer sacrifice for us.
I understand that interpretation as coming out of medieval theology, especially the 12th and the 13th century, and I don't think that is necessarily good theology at all. Uh, what's the point? Jesus himself says, I've come to announce the kingdom. He didn't say, I've come here to die. Here I am, kill me.
And that you may have life and have it in abundance.
Yes.
And,
and so, I think that is a culturally tainted theological interpretation, which really doesn't make much sense these days. Yeah, another reason to reject that, I mean, just to ask the question, some people say God wanted Jesus to die, as if this is to make up for the offenses done against God. Again, medieval theology. What father would want his son to die?
and in that way,
It doesn't make any sense with the biblical understanding of God. And Jesus called God Father, actually called God Daddy, a more intimate kind of term. So that wasn't the way that Jesus understood God. So I don't know why we should understand God in that way. So I reject that interpretation.
Yeah, and also I think God kept giving the Israelites and us second and third and 10th and 155 chances. So, here's Jesus walking around, and there's still a chance that maybe he can get some change going on in this among this people. I feel the same way. you know, I wish there were some way to get through to to the people who have such a hard time understanding love or caring about each other, uh, being more important than what I have or where I live or who you are and what you look like.
I'm a citizen of the United States, and I live in the United States, and I've worked most of my life in the United States. And yet, with the experience in Latin America, the question arises, well, what does this mean for my situation now? And this is an ongoing problem. What my experience in Latin America has given me is an awareness, certainly, of the problems much in general, much more serious in Latin America than they are here, because the levels of poverty are so much greater in Latin America, and the political oppression is so much more harmful to people. But on the other hand, it's also given me insight into the way systems function, the way what we would call the structures of sin in society, the way our society in the United States is set up, the ways that impede people's growth, the way that foster more discrimination, even after the civil rights movement and our great attempt to eliminate that. It keeps coming back on us, which is evident in the political rhetoric going on right now in 2018. So it gives me one inspiration to do what I can, even though I don't have all the solutions again. It gives me ideas on how to address some of these problems, especially, I think, at the level of developing a language that can explain and teach people about the way our societies are set up that propagate these problematic kind of features in society, in economics, in our politics, and all that. So, with our better understanding, we have a chance of addressing them. So, I see that at least as a part of what we have to do in the United States, and that, for me, comes directly out of Latin American experience. Finally, as far as I'm concerned, I just go back to the Bible. Two short passages from the Bible. One from the book of Micah in the Old Testament, chapter 6, verse 8. And the question comes up from the Israelites. What do I do to please the Lord? How can I set myself straight with the Lord? Do I offer all sacrifices? Do I even sacrifice my firstborn son? How can I make up for this? And the answer comes back from God, saying, only one thing is necessary, and I have told you what it is. Practice justice, love goodness, and walk humbly with your God. Very simple, practical advice that we can apply here in the United States. And the second passage would be from Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verse 6. And he's dealing with a different kind of social and cultural situation in the Christian church, the very early Christian church, and the question of circumcision. And he says, speaking for God, he says, it makes no difference whether you're circumcised or not circumcised. That is not the question. The only thing you have to concern yourself with is faith working through love. So you work out your faith by what you do, and you do that with love.
It is not easy to open yourself to another culture, to know enough about it and yourself as you're learning, to become comfortable. It takes time. And I think it was that experience when I came back to the United States which really forced me to look at myself in terms of how I understand the culture around me, not supposedly not foreign. It's the culture I was born into and grew up in, but it is still not easy to understand it. And sometimes it races by me. One of the issues that I had to work with a great deal then and today is the role of women and the understanding of women in the church and their authority or responsibility. And So the women really loved the stories of Jesus um, treating the women as he treated the men, just talking to them. Uh, there was, and we all knew that that was not appropriate behavior for a Jewish male. And um, so that was an important kind of reflection. When I went into another parish, one of the first things I did was start a youth group. And it was a male and female together that had never been heard of. I was amazed to find out that boys and girls could not come together in a social situation in a club. And so we did activities for a period of maybe 5 months together. Um, and for them as well, it was an experience. But I was trying to get at the issue of equality. So the boys were teaching the girls how to use a saw, but the girls were teaching the guys how to dance. It was it was a very um, humbling experience for everyone, and and I think in a good sense, even the pastor of the church, they were very concerned about my having these boys and girls, uh, 12 to 14-year-olds together, because this was sexually suggestive and dangerous, but we did it anyway. So I think that issue then in South America is a big issue. It's a very big issue, and I think it is everywhere in the world today.
I suppose one of the classic passages in Matthew that motivates a lot of us to work in solidarity with others or in a helping way with others is the Last Judgment scene in Matthew 25. Does, do any of you find that, have you found that particularly moving and inspirational? And how do you see that? What is that really saying?
Basically, the sheep are the people who kept struggling for what they thought was right, and they kept discouraged and they kept at it. They didn't give up. And this is the culmination of all of those efforts when they are put in that group. The goats are the people who either didn't care or gave up or just didn't think it was important enough and didn't follow through on it. And it's not just in terms of private devotions, it's not just in terms of personal religiosity, it's in the general context of what did you do for those who are in need? Because, we're social beings. That's just part of our DNA. And so if you have faith, it has to work itself out in that context of our social relationships, how we respect them, honor them, and deal with them when those we're in relationship with are in need.
And isn't Jesus making an important statement there about our love of God being inseparable from our love of one another, especially those in need? So this idea of, your religion is one thing, expressing your love of God, and then other things would be caring for others, but there's no connection between the two. And you can sort of let the second part slide because the main thing is loving God. But this really undercuts that whole notion of kind of a separated realm of religion.
Yes, no, that's true. And the bishops, following on Vatican II, following on the Second Silam Conference, they met in synod in Rome. And in that synod, they put out a document called Justice in the World. And they stated in there that the pursuit of justice is a constitutive element of the gospel. Which means this is essential, folks. You can't leave this out. I mean, if you're going to pay attention and live out the gospel, you have to include that, which means including these problems that your neighbor is facing.
Everyone has a different interpretation of it, but we're provided with a tool, which is love and accompanying people. And sometimes that's all you can do.